We're ready.
Ready. Okay, well, I mean, first, anyway, I wanted to say thank you to all the speakers for the wonderful talk and for making it such a nice event, at least from my point of view, and to all the people behind Georgia Union that helped organizing the event. Pam, again, as you mentioned, which was very helpful. So yeah, thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Andy Egan, who's a professor at Rutgers University, and Andy will tell us about expressivism, truth, and the projects of semantics.
Awesome, thank you. I'm not actually going to say all that much about truth. There's a nearby world in which this talk has more about truth, but that's not this one. So I have a follow-up slide. As the last speaker, it falls to me to lead us in thanking the organizers and hosts of the conference. So thanks so much to Luca, Giorgio, Julian, Lewin, Pam, who I guess is not here. Did I miss anybody?
You share your slides on Zoom.
Oh yeah. Actually, you know what? I can't because I'm not on Zoom.
We're just showing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So they'll be visible on the picture of me. So thanks everybody. Thanks so much. It's been like such a delight to be back at in-person events, and this is a really fantastic first in-person event to go back to. So thank you so much. And if it had been like the first day where they had the booze out for the last talk, we could have done this. So there are a lot of ways in which arriving in one's first year of graduate school can be distressing and disconcerting. I'm going to focus on just one of them today. So when you show up in graduate school, at least in certain departments, you're likely to come across a lot of people spending a lot of time vigorously associating set theoretic objects with linguistic expressions, and vigorously disputing with each other about which set theoretic objects one ought to associate with which linguistic expressions. And it's natural to want to ask some questions about this as you first show up into grad school. Like, what are all these people doing and why are they doing it? What are we doing exactly when we're associating set theoretic objects with linguistic items? What would make it correct to associate one set theoretic object rather than another with a particular linguistic item? With, for example, the English sentence, snow is white. What am I saying about the sentence, snow is white? Or my utterance of my pants are on fire at 4:05 on, what day is it? May 28th, 2022. Or might, or delicious, or wrong, or 3 days ago. What am I saying about those expressions when I associate one rather than another set theoretic object? So to ask that question is to ask a kind of frighteningly deep question about what the project of semantics is, or at least it's frightening for me. But one thing that comes out in Lewis's paper, David Lewis's paper, Languages and Language, is that the first pass answer to that question is actually not that hard. What we're doing when we're associating set theoretic objects with linguistic items is when we're constructing what Lewis calls languages as formal objects. What we're doing is we're modeling something about language as a natural phenomenon. And so you still might ask, like, how does that work exactly? Well, at a very high level of abstraction, there's going to be some mapping from features of our formalism to features of language as a natural phenomenon, features of the phenomenon we're trying to model. And so we can, because there's a mapping from features of the formalism to features of the phenomenon, we can characterize and theorize about the phenomenon by constructing different kinds of formalism, and we can argue about and make claims about the phenomenon by arguing about and making claims about what formalism we ought to be using. So we've got something like this. Now, as it stands, that's a little underspecified, but And so to get a grip on just exactly how a language as formal object can serve to characterize language as a natural phenomenon, we'll want to fill in some more details. That's not yet enough. And so a somewhat cleaned up version of our what are we doing when we're associating set theoretic objects with linguistic items, a somewhat cleaned up version of that question is what is the more detailed, actually helpful version of that diagram? And two important questions to answer in doing that. What's the target phenomenon exactly? And what's the mapping from features of the formalism into features of the phenomenon? So here is an embarrassing fact about me. I personally don't feel like I have anything like the grip on what the space of options for answering that question is that I ought to, like given what my job is. My suspicion is that it's not just me, that's not super idiosyncratic. I think there are a lot of different answers to this question available and a lot of different ways of filling in this diagram that are available. And I think the space of available options is not as sort of clearly mapped out as you might have liked. My other suspicion, and this is what I'm confident about, is that thinking about how to be an expressivist, like how to fill in this diagram if you want to be an expressivist, is a helpful tool for pulling apart and getting clear on some features of the space of options. So my plan for today is to sort of make a start at mapping out the space of options, and then try to say enough stuff that's sufficiently contentious that I can provoke you to say things that will help me get clearer on what's going on. All right, so here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. Going to express some puzzlement about the project of semantics. That's done. Going to say what's so great about Lewis and his paper Languages and Language in this context. Talk about some unforced choices that Lewis makes in setting up the framework that he sets up in Languages and Language, and use that as a way to start drawing the map of the space of options. And then going to wheel in expressivism as a kind of picture of the project separating lever that we can use to pull apart and highlight some distinctions between different ways of thinking about what the project might be. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about put up on here a partial map of options, a very partial map of options, and identify which ones are happy homes for expressivists and which ones I think are. All right, so we'll start with Lewis and Languages and Language. So Lewis frames the project of that paper as the project of squaring this picture of languages as formal objects with this picture of language as a social practice. The way he squares the pictures is by saying, well, we're using formal objects to characterize the social practices. What we do is, with just a version of the kind of very general picture that I put up before, we stipulate a way of mapping back and forth between formal objects and communicative practices. And so by offering a formal semantic theory, we're making a claim about what the communicative practice in the target community is like. And it's the nature of the communicative practice in the targeted community that makes one rather than another formalism the right way. So that gets us to here. So let's say some more about the specific mapping from formalisms to features of the phenomenon that Lewis uses. For today, I'm going to restrict attention to declaratives and ignore context dependence. I think interesting and important stuff happens when you stop ignoring those. Talk about that here. So Lewis says the target phenomenon is the communicative conventions that are in place in the target community. So what we're using the formal languages to model is the communicative conventions that are in place. So the way that communicative conventions work on Lewis's picture is there's a sort of speaker side production convention associated with each sentence to not utter the sentence unless some condition is satisfied. And that's the truth condition of the sentence. And then there's a general convention of trust among hearers to trust that speakers are abiding by their speaker side conventions. So that gives us a picture that looks like this. The formalism in the first instance maps into a production condition for speakers. And then by way of a general convention of trust, it maps into an uptake condition, an uptake convention for audience members. We can just read off the conventional audience response by way of the general convention of trust. Like so. So our formal semantics, as on Lewis's picture, associates declarative sentences with sets of worlds. And the way that the mapping from formal objects to conventions works is that a formal language that associates a sentence S with a set of worlds P maps into a system of communicative conventions like this. There's a speaker side convention to say S only if P, and there's an audience side convention to trust the speakers are saying S only if P. Probably better, I think, this is maybe a little contentious, but probably better, I think, to represent it this way, where the audience side convention is derivative on the speaker side convention by way of a generalized convention of trust. It's not that there's a separate independently moving audience convention for each sentence. And so when we propose a formal semantics that, for example, associates the sentence Snow is white with the set of worlds in which Snow is white, what we're doing is we're proposing a view of the communicative conventions in place in our target community, according to which the sentence Snow is white is governed by conventions such that speakers say Snow is white only if Snow is white, and audiences trust that speakers are saying Snow is white only if Snow is white. And the fact about the communicative practices that makes it correct to associate Snow is white with that set of worlds rather than some other is that this system of conventions is in place. So that is what it makes it the case that Snow is white has the truth condition it does. What makes it the case that Snow is white is true only in the white snow worlds is the presence of these conventions. That's the fact about the target community that makes it correct to associate this set of worlds with the sentence, and it's the fact that this is the right set of worlds to associate the sentence that tells us that what the truth condition of the sentence is. And so for Lewis, telling us how to map formal languages and map between formal languages and systems of conventions, and between features of formal languages and features of systems of conventions, is telling us what it takes for a formal semantic theory to be correct, and what it takes for it to be correct what it takes for it to be correct to associate one rather than another formal object with respect to the sense of natural language. So in Languages and Language, Lewis only talks about the speaker and audience sides of conversational update and the sort of communicative process. But it's natural to read off, like if you, like people are now, are concerned to characterize not just what happens to audience members and what speakers do, but also characterize changes in context. It's natural to read off a context change, a conventional context change effect, which is the thing that would happen if all the participants in the conversation were trusting and trusted each other to be trusting and so on, which is that the proposition that Snow is white winds up getting added to the conversational substitutes. So there's the generalization. Again, back to arbitrary sentence S and proposition P, where proposition P is just a set of worlds. So that is pretty cool. And so here, let me just sort of pound a little bit on why it's cool. One thing that's cool about it is that it tells us at least what sentence level semantic values are in the business of doing. It tells us what we're saying about a sentence when we associate a semantic value with it. And it tells us which phenomena in the world our formalism is answerable to, and what's going to make it correct to go for one formalism rather than another. So it tells us how to use a formal semantic theory to characterize a conventional communicative practice, and it tells us which features of a community's conventional communicative practice a formal theory is answerable to, and how it's answerable to. So it gives us rules for the game. So it gives us rules for the project. And explains what the project's good for. So Lewis frames it as the project of kind of, I don't know exactly why he did it this way, but he frames the project in terms of this kind of cute thesis and antithesis of like the language as formal object versus language as social practice, explained by, and squares those pictures by explaining how we use the formal objects to characterize the social practice. I think a better piece of sales for it would have been to frame it as explaining how to square pictures of meaning as truth conditions and meaning as use by telling us how a particular pattern of use could make it the case that a sentence has some truth conditions, and how you could use an assignment of truth condition to a sentence to characterize a pattern of use. All right, so that is one picture of the project of semantics. And it's a picture, again, where semantics characterizes the systems of conventions that we use in the target community, that we use to communicate with each other and to influence each other's thoughts. And the way it does that, the way it characterizes that system of conventions, is by directly characterizing a production side convention, a speaker side production convention, from which we can then read off conventional audience uptake effects and conventional context change effects. Just quickly note that you can sign on for this kind of picture at this level of description without signing on for Lewis's particular account of what a convention is, right? You can fill in the story about what it takes for a particular convention to be in place in a different way than Lewis does. And also Lewis in Languages and Language is like super dismissive of subsentential semantics, which you might not want to sign up for, and you don't need to sign up for in order to like accept this account of what sentence level semantic values are here. You could still think that there's a for real project of semantics for subsentential expressions that explains how they contribute to the semantic values of sentences. So just to kind of emphasize how valuable a contribution this is, there's just no project of doing formal semantics without a guiding picture of the role that the formalism is playing in characterizing some non-set theoretic phenomenon, right? There's just no such project as like figuring out first what the right set theoretic objects are to associate with an expression, and then later figuring out what the relation is between the set theoretic objects and some non-set theoretic phenomena about communication or use or inferential role or something. That'd be like trying to separate out the project of associating numbers with people on the one hand, and the project of saying how those numbers map into people's heights or weights on the other, right? There's just no such project. You can't. There's no sensible project to engage in of associating numbers with people independent of previously specifying whether those numbers are going to represent their weights or their heights, and just what mapping between numbers and weights or heights you're using, right? Prior to answering the questions about how the numbers map into non-mathematical properties of people, there just aren't any rules for the game, and so there's no project to engage in. And same goes for semantics. Prior to saying something about how the formalism is going to map into some non-set theoretic features of language or language users or language use, there's just no project to engage in of associating formal objects with sentences. I'm trying to be sort of maximally provocative with that, but I feel like that's right. Sometimes people write stuff that sounds like they think there is a separate project of like getting the formalism right, and then which leaves it an open question, like what the empirical significance of the formalism is. Like Galson sometimes writes in ways that suggest that he's thinking something like this. Charlo sometimes writes like he's thinking something like this. McFarlane sometimes. So for example, when people say stuff like, this is a semantics that can be given either a relativist or an expressivist or a contextualist interpretation, it sounds like maybe it's tempting to think they're signing up for some picture like that. or when people sign up for a sharp distinction between semantics proper and post-semantics, can sound like people are signing up for that kind of picture. But I don't think that can be the right interpretation of what people are doing when they say those things. I have some thoughts about how we ought to hear those bits of rhetoric, which I may try to sneak in response to somebody's answer at Q&A. It'll be really easy if you just ask me a question. I won't have to sneak it in. All right. So that's what's so great about Lewis and Language. He gives us rules for the game. So I want to get started on the project of mapping the space of possible pictures by looking at a few points where Lewis makes unforced choices about how to give the rules for the game, and that the different kinds of pictures that you get if you make different choices at those points. So, like, great job, Lewis, you gave us rules for the game, but you did not give us the only possible rules for the game. There's other things we could have said. And there's other things people do say either explicitly or implicitly about this. All right, so let's retreat back to the radically underspecified picture. We have a couple choices to make about how to fill this in. One choice is about what the target phenomenon is exactly. And the other choice is about how the features of the formalism map into the features of the target phenomenon once we selected it. And Lewis makes unforced choices about both. Let's talk about the choice of target domain first. So on Lewis's story, what the formalism maps into directly is the communicative conventions, maps into the system of conventions that's in place in the target community. So what it is for a sentence to have a particular truth condition on Lewis's picture, what makes a semantics that associates a sentence with one truth condition rather than another correct, is some features of the communicative practice. It's that the sentence plays a particular communicative role in the target community. So in Lewis's story, sentences have the truth conditions they do because, and in virtue of, in virtue of the fact that they play the conventional communicative role that they do. The representational properties are grounded in their communicative role properties. That's a non-mandatory answer to the Euthyphro question about the relative priority of representational properties and communicative roles. And it's not the right answer to the Euthyphro question about at least some things that we can use for communicative purposes. So think about photographs. I can use a photograph to communicate information to you. You can use a photograph to communicate information to me. But the photograph is well suited to play the communicative role that it plays because of its independently grounded representational properties. It'd be bananas to say that the photograph had the representational properties it had because of the role it played in our communicative practice. It's suitable to play that role in a communicative practice because it's got the representational properties it has. Same seems like it goes for maps. Maybe maps are maybe a little more contentious. And so, like, when my wife asks, where did you put the car keys? One way that I could respond, and this is probably the way I should respond, is by saying they're on the dining room table. But another way I could respond is by showing her a photograph of my keys on the dining room table. Another way I could respond is by showing her a map, like so. And there's a lot to criticize about this way of answering the question, but it definitely is a way of answering the question. The map or the photograph is well suited to play the communicative role of informing Anne about where the keys are, right? But it's well suited to play that role because it's got some independently grounded representational properties. It doesn't have those representational properties because it plays the role. So we could alternatively have said that what the formalism is in the first instance in the business of characterizing is the representational properties of sentences, right? People who have signed up for that view under annoying pressure by me about to say what their view is are like Stallnacker, Michael Glansberg, and Josh Dever. So that's two pictures. I should note so that I am very high credence that there will be a lot more options about what to say at this stage when you're trying to characterize the target phenomenon than just the communicative conventions and the representational properties. I expect that there are people in this room who've made different choices about that than either of those. I'm eager to get pushed on that and to learn about it. I'm not going to do any of the preemptive. I already thought that. Crap, butt covering. I'm just going to leave that, just to let people say so. All right, next choice point. So holding fixed that we're going Lewis's way, and we're taking the target phenomenon to be the system of communicative conventions in place in the target community. There's still choices to make about just how formalism maps into a system of communicative conventions. So you'll note I previously had 3 different kind of conventional communicative things up there. I had the speaker side production convention, the audience side uptake convention, and the conventional context change effect. And Lewis does it this way. He takes the first point of contact between the formalism and the system of conventions to be with the production convention, and then the others get read off. This arrow should actually be like that. No, sorry. This arrow should be like that. But you could make either of the other 2 choices. So here's how Lewis does it, just as a reminder. But you could also do it this way. You could say that the first point of contact between the formalism and the system of communicative conventions in place in the community is with the audience side uptake conventions. And so here's what something like that would look like. When you say the semantic value of some sentence S is some set of worlds P, or is some proposition P. Let me back off a little bit from the specification of exactly what a proposition is. And then the audience side convention is going to be when somebody uses S, update with P. Speaker side, there's going to be a sort of natural speaker side convention to read off of that, which is trust that your audience will respond to your uses of S by updating with P. And there's a natural conventional context change effect to read off of that, which is to change the context that'll happen if everybody does the update and trusts that everybody else is doing the update and so on, which is you update the common ground. Here's another choice for how to do it. On the speaker side, how to read off a speaker side convention from the same audience side convention. Maybe the speaker side convention is a make sure it's a good idea convention. I'm not sure how different those really are. They look like they're going to wind up predicting pretty much the same stuff. But, so third option, our first point of contact between formalism and the semantics could be with conventional context change effects. There are people in the room who have said things like this. So here's how that would look. You associate sentence S with formal object P. The conventional context change effect is in response to uses of S, update the common ground with P. I'm not going to protect myself. I'm just going to say it like that. Then a natural speaker side convention to read off of that is a sort of make sure it's a good idea convention. So speakers say yes only if it's a good idea to update the common ground with P. And then an audience side convention, do your bit toward updating the common ground with P. So that's third and fourth pictures of what we're doing. We're doing semantics. I'm mostly interested today in what's at stake in deciding between the first sort of speaker side picture that Lewis goes for and the disjunction of the 2 audience side or context side ones. I think there's interesting stuff about whether to do a sort of individual audience member update side first or context first one also, but there are not enough minutes in the session for me to say my shtick about that. All right, so I think something needs to be said about what's different about these, because it's very easy to take the choice between these 3 different ways of mapping from formalisms into communicative practices to be a don't care. I'm kind of talking to the wrong room for that, because many of the people in the room already figured out why it's not a don't care. But let me say a little bit about it. So a semantic theory that associates a set of assigns a set of worlds in which snow is white to the sentence snow is white looks like it maps into either the same practice or practices that's going to be incredibly difficult for us to pull apart, no matter which of the three things you say about what the mapping looks like. So here's the production first version. You associate the sentence snow is white with a set of white snow worlds. That tells you the speaker side convention is say snow is white only if snow is white. Audience side convention, trust that speakers are saying snow is white only if snow is white. Predictably, that'll lead people to update with the proposition that snow is white. Conventional context change effect, add that snow is white to conversational presuppositions. Here's what it looks like on an audience side picture. When somebody says snow is white, update with the proposition that snow is white. Speaker side convention, say snow is white only if it's a good idea for your audience to update with snow is white to a first approximation, only if snow is white. Conventional context change effect, update the common ground with the proposition that snow is white. Here's the context change first one. Conventional context change effect, in response to use of snow is white, update the common ground with the proposition that snow is white. Speaker side convention, say snow is white only if it's a good idea to update the common ground with that snow is white. That is, only if snow is white. Audience side convention, do your bit toward updating the common ground with that snow is white. That is, update your own acceptance state or belief state with the proposition that snow is white. Trust everybody else is doing so as well. I mean, those all look pretty good as stories about the sentence that snow is white. But they all look pretty good because they all look the same, right? And so it's natural to see that and think, you know, yeah, okay, in principle, there are these differences in how you map from formalism into your communicative conventions, but they're not differences that are going to make a difference. And so this choice is a kind of a who cares. So I think there is some room for dissent at this stage, even about sentences like snow is white. But for now, let's grant that they're all three co-predictive for cases where we're associating sentences with possible worlds propositions. Useful, then, I think, to talk about a place where the difference is pretty clearly important. So if you're working in a production first framework, understanding semantic values as in the first instance in the business of characterizing production conditions, speaker side production conditions. And then you characterize everything else by way of conventions of trust. What happens if everybody trusts? Then a certain kind of expressivism is going to just look impossible. So in particular, like Stevensonian expressivism, expressivism where the role of moral discourse isn't just to make descriptive claims about the world, but to express our non-doxastic attitudes and enjoin our interlocutors to share them. That's going to look impossible. So this is a picture where some declarative sentences, like for example, it's wrong to put puppies in the eyes with sticks, have a central conventional communicative role that isn't just to get your audience to believe something, but to get them to adopt a particular non-doxastic attitude. So the reason why this is going to look impossible on a sort of Lewisian production first picture is that in that kind of picture, semantic values always in the first instance serve to characterize a production condition. And audience uptake, the audience uptake convention is just always read off by way of general convention of trust, which means that audience uptake is always going to be doxastic, right? It's always going to be just a matter of believing that the speaker satisfies the condition. So there's a sort of Jackson-Pettit argument against the possibility of expressivism that I think is based on taking this kind of picture for granted. So I'll do a somewhat cartoonified version of it. This is photo credit to David Brent Mitchell. This is them gleefully celebrating the death of expressivism. Here's I think a pretty fair characterization of the Jackson-Pettit argument. Like, look, if there's enough of a conventional discipline practice to support any kind of linguistic meaning, then there are conventional production conditions associated with the sentence. There are some conditions under which it's conventionally kosher to say it, and conditions under which it's not. If there are conventional production conditions, then there are truth conditions, because that's just all it takes for there to be truth conditions. What makes it correct to assign a truth condition is the presence of a production condition. So either there's enough of a sort of disciplined practice of using sentences to support some kind of linguistic meaning, in which case there are truth conditions, in which case not expressivism. Or there's not enough of a disciplined practice to support linguistic meaning of any kind, in which case there's no linguistic meaning of any kind, in which case not expressivism. So not expressivism. I think this argument doesn't work, but I think this argument looks pretty compelling if you think that the only available story about the way that semantic theories for declaratives characterize communicative practices in communities is the sort of Lewisian truthfulness trust way. There's just nothing a community could do that would justify attributing linguistic meaning on this Lewisian model to a declarative sentence that wouldn't justify attributing a truth condition. And in the other direction, I think maybe more importantly, in the other direction, there's no set theoretic object that you could associate with a sentence in this Lewisian kind of truthfulness trust framework that would map into an expressivist communicative practice. Because everything will just map into a condition on speakers, and uptake will always just be by way of the convention of trust, coming to believe that the speaker satisfies the condition. And so, let P be whatever you like. If there's enough disciplined practice to determine a conventional truth production condition, that's all it takes to get a truth condition. And so expressivists are going to wind up stuck with subjectivist truth conditions, and worse than that, they're going to be stuck with truth conditions. So I think that does look really compelling if you're like committed to a Lewisian picture of the project. But if you're working in or open to working in an uptake first picture or a context first picture, things look really different. On that kind of view, there's room to have some formal objects around that map into doxastic truth uptake conditions, and have some other formal objects around that map onto non-doxastic uptake conditions. And then you say that an expressivist theory about some sentence S is one that associates S with one of the formal objects that maps into a non-doxastic uptake condition. So here's a version of that for the audience side. Uptake first one. We say everything just like we said before, but now we're a little less restrictive about what P is. We leave it open that P is not a set of worlds, P is some other kind of formal object, where we specify that those kinds of formal objects represent and map into non-doxastic uptakes, non-doxastic things to uptake with. And so we need P to be something other than a possible world, something such that updating your acceptance state with it is doing something non-doxastic. It could be a value function or a class of value functions or something that represents a planning state or a norm endorsement or an attitude of approval or disapproval. There's a lot of choices for how to do it. And it's not going to be all like smooth sailing. Like you need to actually tell the story about which objects you're associating and which non-doxastic updates they map into and how the compositional semantics goes. But there's not an in-principle obstacle to telling this kind of story in the way that there is if you were sort of wedded to a Lewisian truthfulness trust. So there's the context first way to do it. Here you'll want some formal objects that map into doxastic-ish updates of common ground, some other formal objects that map into non-doxastic updates, non-doxastic-ish updates of common ground. And then an expressivist theory of S is going to be one that associates S with some P that maps to a non-doxastic context change. Yalcin style moral and creedal expressivisms are both going to be like this. They're both in this category. I think a Moss style story about probabilistic assertion, if I have my head around review properly, is like this. And I think a Charlo style expressivism is also going to be like this. I'm confident about the Yalcin. I'm less confident about my grip on the Moss and the Charlo. And so one place where the choice about choice of how you're mapping your assignments of formal semantic values into some target phenomenon, in particular in this case, how you're mapping them into systems of communicative conventions, one place where that really does matter is that if you're doing it in the sort of Lewisian truthfulness and trust way, the possibility of Stevensonian expressivism is going to be invisible to you. Right? You're not going to be able to, there's going to be no formal semantics you could offer that would map into a Stevensonian expressivist practice. If you're doing your semantics in either an audience first or a context first way, then there will be ways to give a formal semantic. It's not going to be totally straightforward, but it's going to be at least in principle possible to do. Which means, I think one thing that's interesting about expressivism is that thinking about how you implement expressivism serves to sort of pry apart these different ways of thinking about the project of semantics that might have looked like they were just going to be like 6 half-dozen if you were only thinking about declarative sentences of possible instruments. Another place where I think the distinction is interesting is that they can start to pull apart sort of different bits of expressivist rhetoric. So there's different kinds of rhetoric expressivists use when they're describing their view and kind of trying to give people the sort of general intuitive grip on expressivism. One kind of rhetoric is like giving voice to your non-doxastic attitude, displaying them, expressing in this sort of intuitive, like, I have this attitude and I'm expressing it by making it visible to all of you in this way, right? So that suggests kind of a speaker first reading, which I think is not especially helpful actually for the expressivist. The Stevensonian do so as well talk kind of suggests an audience side uptake condition way of thinking about it. And the sort of coordinating on attitudes talk that you see in like prominently Yalcin and Charlo suggests a sort of context change first sort of picture. And so I think one moral of thinking about this is that like expressivists shouldn't just lean on that first bit of expressivist rhetoric about like giving voice to your attitudes, because that leads naturally into an understanding where it's just like, yeah, the production condition is that you got the attitude, and then like the truth condition is that you got the attitude. But the other ones are not capturable in that kind of way. The other ones seem like they really are distinctive, reflect a distinctively expressivist kind of thing. All right, so some kind of concluding thoughts and take-home messages. So very high level of abstraction. I think it's clear what we're doing. When we're doing semantics, we're using a formal system to characterize some non-formal features about language, language users, and/or language use. But when we start kind of descending and trying to fill in the details about just what the target phenomenon is and how the formalism maps into it, it gets less straightforward, and there are a lot of choice points. And the choices one makes at different points in it matter for what kinds of features and what kinds of phenomena your formalism is going to be well suited to represent. So here is the woefully incomplete map that we have so far. There's this choice point about target phenomenon. And you could take the targets to be representational properties, or you could take the target to be communicative conventions. And then if you go this way, you can tell a speaker first story, where the first point of contact between formalism and the communicative conventions is the production norm, production convention. You could do a hearer first story, where the first point of contact is update effects on particular individual audience members. Or you could do tell me a context first story, where the first point of contact is going to be context change effects. And from either of these from any of these points of entry, it's natural to read off the other points of entry. One of the things that I have not done, well, there are a number of things that I have not done here because there's a number of other options, some of which I've thought of, but some of which I'm sure I haven't, for what the target phenomenon might be. There are also I presupposed in setting this up that there's a unique first point of contact, and then you read what happens to the other ones off of your first point of contact. That's not the only thing you could say. You could have bits in your formalism that independently specify production conditions, uptake conditions, and context change effects. Some of those systems are going to be weird and tonky, right? Like that's going to leave you. So one thing that's weird about that is it requires a kind of formalism that I don't think anybody offers. But another is that it leaves it open to specify for a given sentence like a production condition, say it only if snow is white, an uptake condition, update with grass is green, right? It'd be super weird and be a crazy linguistic practice. Maybe we don't want to have the resources to characterize those kinds of tonky linguistic practices. But that is an available thing to do, which complicates the picture a lot. All right, so the main thing that I am hoping to do with this is like get some help in addressing my own uncomfortable ignorance and lack of understanding about the space of options and like where different people live on the space of options. I have like made some claims about what the space of options looks like, or at least a partial specification of what the space of options looks like. And where some of the choices are important, but that's mainly just been in order to try and provoke you to say stuff that allow me to understand this better. Thanks very much.